As technology advances, the importance of robust security measures within the AV landscape become increasingly paramount, from protecting sensitive data to ensuring the integrity of AV installations. This session explores the dynamic intersection of security and innovation in the AV industry. And to moderate, AECOM Industry Director, Technology Advisory for Asia Pacific, Mr. Richard Morrison. Good to see you again, Richard. Thank you for coming.
Yeah, thank you very much, Tim. And welcome to our panel. I'll introduce our panel members and then I'll start off with some interesting thoughts, I guess, around AV security. And later in the session, we'll have some Q&A. But first, I'd like to bring in Bradley from Cisco. So Bradley leads the cybersecurity specialist at Cisco, covering the Asia Pacific and Japan region. He works with partners to help them build relevant and successful security services. So obviously the network piece is one of those aspects around AV, but also how that ecosystem then performs. So welcome, Bradley. And then next I'd like to introduce Joe. So Joe is the Executive Vice President of Corporate Development at BIAMP, and that looks after strategy, research, and modern marketing. Welcome, Joe. And lastly, on our panel, we've got Jonathan. So Jonathan's the Director of Technology at Connexus AV Consulting. He's a seasoned consultant leader with over a decade of experience simplifying complex technology, and hasn't it got more complex?
Well, more simple and more complex at the same time, if I can say that.
So welcome to our panel. I just wanted to kick off. I think we've seen a number of different cybersecurity incidents, particularly in AV recently. One of them was the Victorian courts. They were hit by a major a cyber attack in December 2023, where hackers were able to access sensitive audio-visual content and audio recordings from materials used in trials. And that, to me, as soon as I heard that, I went, default passwords, maybe. Very, very simple barrier, perhaps. More recently, we've had the CrowdStrike issue, which whilst it wasn't directed at AV, I did see a number of display walls that had blue screens of death, and it was a long time since I'd seen a Windows blue screen of death, so I thought that was quite interesting. And as we were preparing for this panel, actually the team talked about some of the things that we do have issues in AV may not necessarily now, as we've got modern networks and connectivity and products and devices, maybe it's no longer as much a technology risk as it's actually we're starting to look back at the analog risks. So that's, things like, are they able to hear the conversation? Have I left sensitive content, on paper, those sorts of things. So I wanted to kick off, really just with some introductory questions around AV security. I'm going to go to you, Joe. How have you seen the landscape of AV security evolve with the advancement of technology?
Well, certainly in the AV industry, the predominant trend has been a migration of all AV onto the network, so that now we are more or less dependent on the network for transport and pretty much all things related to connecting the devices together and facilitating collaboration. Clearly that brings with it all the same exposure points as on the network. Whereas before we used to, hide by obscurity in some ways and provide security that way, we can no longer do that. And one of the unique tensions for audiovisual is we have this strong impulse to make our systems accessible. We want people to come in and we want them to get to work and we want them to collaborate seamlessly, and we won't want to put up barriers to them doing that, whether they be authentication barriers or anything, right? We want it to feel natural. Technology should be in the background. And that stands in opposition to the need to go and say, well, how do I ensure that these people who are coming in collaborating are the people I expected them to be, are accessing information that they're permitted to access? And so that's a little bit of a tension I don't know that we've fully resolved at BIAMP, and we confront it all the time, right? Well, sometimes we make it very, very secure, and people complain that it's too hard to use. You flip the switch the other way, and all of a sudden you're a story, and I don't want to be at either end of that.
Yeah, certainly that seems to be an increasing possibility, I guess. I often talk to people about, where are your walls? Do you have any walls at all? Or, because as the threat level increases, we need to increase our barriers and protection. But Jonathan, what do you think are the primary security concerns facing the AV industry at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't think there is enough awareness that AV is a risk. We need to be raising awareness that AV is a real risk and there is valuable information. We need to be looking at it from a network and a cyber aspect, but also a physical aspect as well. A very simple example is if you got AV rack in a room that's not locked up, it's very easy access for someone to get into that. And to your point about the courts, someone can connect something and be able to get information about court proceedings. So that's a very important aspect, as well as the network. Now, to your point, Joe, about becoming on the network more and more these days, it's essentially every AV device is now connected to a network. Now, we used to approach that from a very siloed viewpoint, and we used to have isolated networks. But products now need to connect and need to converse with other systems and processes, and the only way to do that is on an active network. So we can no longer go down the path of just saying, you know what, we'll just put it on its own thing, it's isolated, and we don't care about it. We now really have to take an approach of how do we secure it when it's connected to a wider network. And the last point I just want to make there is a role of understanding the barriers that you want in place. And what do I mean by that? Well, you need to understand the risk of that particular situation. If it's highly valuable information, maybe the friction or the barriers for the uses are high because of that information. But on the other end of the spectrum, if the information is not that valuable, well, maybe we reduce those barriers and make it easier for people to connect and collaborate.
And if we move into the sort of what we're protecting, I guess it's sensitive data. And what strategies and technologies, Bradley, do you think are most effective in protecting sensitive data, particularly as it's transmitted through an AV system?
Yeah, so first of all, I'll be the fun police, cybersecurity guy, not a AV guy. So I'm looking at this from the cyber side, as in, we've been obviously ruining all your fun with web security for a long time now. You're welcome. We're also very experienced at dealing with issues. So, when the others talk about awareness around AV security and some of the issues that can actually happen, we've seen a lot and we've experienced a lot and we've obviously learned along the way. So hopefully as, these systems start to collapse, and maybe this is also one for your silo discussion last, but, we need to be bringing some of the things that we've learned on the IT security side, we need to be bringing them to AV security. So I can think of many, many examples. Cisco, obviously I'm also the networking guy, sorry about that. But as your devices are coming onto the actual network, we talked about they used to be on separate networks, now they need to be available to lots of different devices. That to me is a use case for intelligent segmentation. So I'm talking about, not physically segmented networks, because obviously then they're not connected, but I'm talking about devices that come on, and then we're using aspects of a concept, and I kind of reluctantly mention it because it's over-marketed, like a lot of things we see in IT, but zero trust. So it's all about that device coming onto the network, and that device has zero connection to anything until we understand exactly what that device is, who are the people behind that device, what it needs to talk to. And that's not just humans, it's also other applications as well. So, anything connected to the network needs to be identified, validated, and only connected to the resources and the people that actually need to be using that resource. But we need to do that smartly, and it has to change and evolve, because otherwise then we're creating barriers. So it has to be available, it has to be secure. And I think Joe made a great point starting off, which way do you sort of lean? Are you more secure or more open? And I think every organisation needs to consider that differently.
And then if we move to you, Joe, thinking about maybe the analog data element, the AV aspect, what are some of the considerations then around protecting, that sensitive data?
Yeah, I think quite understandably, because it's where all the data goes. There's been a lot of attention to the data once it's on the network. And we appreciate all the work the IT industry does for us to kind of plow the way there so we don't have to figure out those difficult questions ourselves. But one of the interesting things about audiovisual is it sits at the intersection of the physical and the digital, right? I mean, AV really is about engaging people in a physical space like this and involving people at a remote location, and that's where we get introduced to the network, among for other reasons. And so one point of exposure that remains, even if we do a great job of handling all the network security, is what happens to point of ingest and delivery, right? This conversation, you stand outside, you can listen on this all day long. And there really is nothing to prevent you from that other than that little screen there. And sometimes that's well thought out, and other times it's not so well thought out, and sometimes people don't really appreciate that. And so there is an opportunity for looking at that as a potential security breach. There's solutions for that. There's sound masking solutions, there's eavesdropping protection, there's protective optical films that can help prevent people from casually walking by a glass conference room and being able to read material that's on the screen. Most people don't use them. I mean, they really don't. They just assume that it's all good, that everybody walking by is either a well-intentioned actor or they just don't care. Most of the time that's true, but the problem with security is you're planning for the exception, not the rule, and we usually don't in the physical realm.
And then in terms of organisations being compliant with data protection regulations, one of the things that has come up in my sphere is thinking about ISO 27001 compliance, telling people that you comply with that, but then going about the certification. What are some of the things that that we're seeing from using advanced AV technologies, but then also that data compliance? Do you want to pick that one up, Jonathan?
Look, that's not something that's really discussed with our clients. It's not something that people are really aware of or asking for. So it's something that we as an industry need to be advocating and talking to the clients about the importance of that. Similar to the physical security, similar to the network security, it's another component.
And I think, sorry, just to pick up on that, obviously, being compliant and privacy concerns and all that sort of stuff, we've been dealing with that for years. So again, that's another area where we need to be expanding our reach in a respectful way into the AV to help you understand what you need to be adhering to, maybe give you some ideas about how you could protect this sort of stuff. I mean, you're talking about the data on screens, what's recorded inside meetings. All of this is absolutely should be under the realms of the privacy concerns you've got, whether it's PCI or it's IRAP certified for federal government, whatever it may be. I think for a long time, should I say, we haven't thought about AV as being a repository of that sort of information. So not only is it a dangerous opportunity for people to target a organisation, it's also a repository of data that we need to make sure that we're controlling. And I guess the offer is there. Sorry, with your technology, we know kind of the privacy controls and how we've dealt with it in our technologies. That's where we need to work a lot better together. Like we should all be on a first name basis. If I go downstairs into the show, for example, you'll see the big Cisco stand with all the gear on it, all these fancy flashing lights and cameras and stuff. If you look over on the far side in the deep, dark depths of the show, you'll find the Cisco cybersecurity stand where, we are. I'd probably know only one person on the Cisco stand. I mean, I know that's, big vendor, big company, etc. But your IT security people should know your AV security people. We should, be talking to each other. We should be catching up regularly and making sure that we're collaborating. If I'm bringing a new, security technology in, how can I make that as a benefit to the infrastructure that you guys are managing, for example?
And I think all of those requirements are getting even more acute. I mean, I can think of, Biamp as a vendor, we manufacture equipment. And for the long time, what we've looked at from a security point of view is how do we ensure sort of like device level security? How do we make sure we don't provide backdoors or any sort of points of intrusion for that? Or even worse, we inadvertently open up some part on the network just because we were an easy point of entry and now all of a sudden they went off. So they didn't exploit AV, they exploited AV to exploit something else. But the more interesting thing that's happening right now is this interest in moving towards sort of cloud managed solutions. And now all of a sudden Biamp is thinking about we are a repository of information. Now all of a sudden we're going to hold information about people's installations on their behalf, of course, but we are going to be holding it. What are we going to do to ensure we protect that appropriately? And again, what's thankful to the work of the IT industry is there's lots and lots of standards for us to follow, so we don't have to figure it out ourselves, but we do have to do it.
I agree with what they're saying.
I was just going to, quickly add, just from a vendor to a vendor thing, trust is takes years to earn, takes seconds to lose it. As we're all moving into these cloud-managed environments and, as customers and consumers, you've got more data living in the cloud, it's I think one of the critical things that people probably don't do enough is think about who actually has their data and what sort of practices are they actually running and how secure are they actually. I mean, you only have to, Google the word Microsoft Azure, perhaps, to sort of see, some of the issues. But, all the providers have it. I'm not just picking on Big Blue, but they seem to have their fair share. But, we do need to take more consideration about the information that's living outside our organisations because it's happening more and more often.
Interesting point that you were making, I think, as well, Joe, about having cloud-based services, and also the point that you made about it being an entry point to other more important information. A simple thing like a projector or an LCD screen is connected to the network, and maybe in and of itself doesn't hold any particular value. But if it's connected to a cloud management service that's then connected to Azure or ID service, where it then can access other information, all of a sudden now you have an attack vector that's very effective and low security.
And if that device has, and most of them do, if I look at a VoIP phone, for example, there's always 2 network ports on the back of it. Most of your devices probably have 2 network ports. Is that second network port locked down, or is that, could I plug in there and assume the identity of the device that's already authenticated?
That does raise a really interesting point, I think, particularly in the asset life cycle. When you're disposing of technology, we often think of devices, I think, with having no data in them. So a VoIP phone is a classic example where people go, oh, well, there's no data in that. Well, there's actually the network addresses. And we've had a number of instances where asset recycling companies have shown how they can access active networks just by having one VoIP phone that's gone to the tip, for example. So it's a really interesting area.
And actually there's a bank in Malaysia, which shall remain nameless, so they're actually compromised by exactly this. So they were basically upgrading their VoIP phones. Obviously every network connected device has something called a MAC address. The bank had done all the right things in terms of IT security. They were running, network access control, which is essentially saying these devices can plug in, these ones can't. It was a phone. It had the MAC address was authorised to connect to the network. It's quite easy to actually read the MAC address off a device and then spoof that onto another network card. And actually how they got compromised was the attacker basically picked up one of the second-hand phones, grabbed the MAC address, got it on a device, and then thephysically plugged into the network through a branch that wasn't very securely controlled and was able to, straight onto the network. And unfortunately, their segmentation wasn't really that robust, and the VoIP phone had access to a lot of different things. So it's real.
So given the refresh cycle that we're seeing on AV systems, I'm gathering or sensing that that's probably more of a risk now with these network-connected devices. Joe, are there any guidance that you're providing those that use your product in terms of asset disposal
or something like that? I would say that no, we don't have a particular point of view on that. It's an interesting one, and don't have a well-developed point on that.
I actually think it's up to IT security. So we're the ones that are controlling the NAC, the network access control. So network access control shouldn't be a on or off. It needs to be a process that you're regularly reviewing. So that, when you're retiring, and that's again where we need to work together. So if you're retiring a bunch of devices, tell me which devices that you're retiring. I'll make sure I've removed them from NAC, validate that, and then obviously you'll need to talk to me to to get the new ones connected anyway. So, we need to be, and this is probably something that's not happening today. I've never heard of it, but, this is something that needs to happen.
That's how we're doing it.
Oh, it's my fault.
Well, actually, it's quite funny. I've been doing a little bit of research into, e-waste at the moment, and I think, the IT industry have a very robust process in place for e-waste and data destruction, but the AV industry does not. Most organisations, when they decommission equipment, they just take it to the local tip and put it into the e-waste section, and that's the job done. There's no data destruction and there's no wiping of the information of those systems.
Yeah, or perhaps it gets sold on eBay if there's some residual value of a projector or a display. So yeah, it's a very interesting point, but it's one, and again it goes back to that concept of how high are your walls. And I think what we've seen probably is that until you've had a cyber incident of some description, your walls are probably very low, and then once you do, your walls become much higher. But we'll move on to...
just quickly on walls. One thing I would say is that talking to most cybersecurity people, the world's about to stop spinning, right? Everything's so serious, it's all so negative. At the end of the day, your organisations, have a think about what sort of target you are. What sort of industries do you work in? I mean, are people really going to care? It's, to get in via AV equipment, it's going to be the very serious attackers, which mean that you're going to be a pretty attractive target to them. So having a think about what sort of target I actually am, and then sort of reflecting that back to maybe the investment, how serious you're taking cybersecurity, I think is a lot of people just, take whatever the vendors are saying at their word, and I have to overinvest in everything to do with cybersecurity. It may not be the case. Have a think about it from your own personal circumstance.
We'll move into ensuring the integrity of AV installations. This is a very broad area because it's quite a big topic when we start thinking about projects. But what are the best practices for ensuring the integrity of security in AV installations? I'll start with you, Jonathan. I mean, you're active in this space.
Yeah, so Bradley, I think your point about zero trust is very important. I think you need to understand each device and not provide it any trust, and have that trust expire as well, so you're able to reevaluate what it's been doing. But from a integration or a construction viewpoint, we need to have a strict set of standards about how you deploy products. What do you do? What services are they accessing? So right now, it's quite often I go to site and I do an inspection to see if things are installed correctly. And yes, the screen is installed on the wall at the right height, and the soundbar and the audio processor. But then I log into the audio processor and it's got a default admin password. Or the services that it's using are 1 of 10, but the other 9 are not turned off. So it's very important, I think, as a manufacturer, I think we need to approach it as, let's turn everything off to start with, and you're only turning things on that you actually need for that particular deployment.
Yeah, and I would agree with that philosophy. I do acknowledge that the industry is coming from a point of pretty lax security, and that the approaches that were done were more favoring accessibility, ease of installation, ease of configuration, make sure people aren't prevented from getting in so they can get it set up. But as a consequence, you're leaving yourself open to attack vectors that are actually pretty straightforward to exploit. We're getting better. So we are taking it more seriously. I've referenced a couple of times, following the IT industry's lead. That's not being, I'm not joking about that. That's literally quite serious. They've done a fantastic job, right? They've been dealing with these issues well longer than the AV industry has, and with the growth of the IoT vector, where now you're seeing a greater array of different devices now all being introduced to the network. All the different variations that AV might introduce are probably been considered in one of the approaches. And so we're just trying to follow best practices elsewhere and not try to reinvent them. We're not starting from a point of security expertise, to be honest. It's AV audio expertise or video expertise. So we are acknowledging that and looking towards the experts to guide us to doing a good job of being good neighbors.
I'm not sure about experts, but we've certainly probably experienced it before and dealt with it somehow, or learned on the, to deal with it. I do absolutely take the point. I mean, if I look at, obviously I know a bit about the Cisco AV equipment, not so much about, what you might be working with, but, I see a lot of principles put across there that have come from IT. So things like, dedicated operating systems, updates that are digitally signed by a certificate. Those sorts of things, in-place encryption obviously on the device to keep the data private and secure. All those things have obviously come from IT security, which is great. But we just need to make sure that we're doing more work together, I think.
I think for the audience, I think the first question that you need to ask, and this comes back to my opening points about awareness, it's just ask a question. What is your process around the security of your AV devices? That simple question is going to prompt either the consultant like myself or the AV integrator or the person responsible for deploying that system to stop and say, well, what are they? What am I doing to secure these devices, or thinking about security aspects?
So is that happening? Are we identifying right now in projects AV vulnerabilities and mitigating them, whether that's sort of formally through a penetration test or whether it's something there where maybe there's some ethical hacking that's happening from a product perspective, where there's a security lab perhaps where we're testing these products and looking for vulnerabilities and patching them, probably more akin to an IT type process, or is it really driven by what the customer's asking for and their level of security?
It's absolutely driven by the customer's desire. We do see a limited number of vulnerability scanning that goes out and looks at the AV devices as well, but that's kind of the extent of it. And I think what we need to do is we need to look at a more holistic approach as well. So installation is one component, but then you need to look at the ongoing monitoring and support of those devices as well, so you continually monitor what is happening. It's quite funny, actually. I'll bring an example of the XZ backdoor hack. Essentially, there is an open source piece of software that is developed as part of the Linux system. That piece of software was compromised by an actor who took over development of that and started to build in backdoors, unbeknownst to everybody else. And it actually took someone at Microsoft, when they were doing their development testing, they saw a performance regression and started to investigate why is that actually happening. And they uncovered those backdoors before it was actually deployed into their production system. So ongoing monitoring of your systems and understanding why is it not behaving the way it used to is a very important part of that question.
So I think you're getting into monitoring. So, IT security, cyber security, depending on the size of your organisation, obviously for the nation's largest organisations, that's a 24/7, 365 operation done by a security operations centre with a bunch of security analysts. You always spot them because they're the ones that have 3 or 4 monitors and all the coolest, curved monitors and everything. They always seem to have all the cool stuff. But these are the guys who are looking out for the security aspects for your organisation. They're looking for threats. They're looking for, vulnerabilities, those sorts of things. What they're not looking at right now is your AV infrastructure. But I think not only do our policies and procedures need to get better, but I'm technologist, so our technology is not there either. So, we're getting closer now to doing things like just being able to see the OT or AV infrastructure inside the Security Operations Centre's tools and technologies that we're actually running. Where we need to try and get to is the ability to, scan those devices for vulnerabilities. We need to be able to, look at the network traffic, the flows, etc., from those devices and see any signs of any alerts or anything of a cyber incident may be actually happening. And then we need to be able to ticket that into our common ticketing system and then assign that ticket to the AV expert, because they're the ones that know what they're doing, to go and resolve. Where I think this could go wrong is if we start relying on IT security to go and resolve the issue, because they're not the experts in your infrastructure, your AV infrastructure, I mean. And we need to make sure that we're working from a common ecosystem, but the right people are doing the remediation work.
And just to emphasise the importance of that continual monitoring, AV devices used to be a black box and they performed one particular function on day 1, and on day 100 they performed that exact same function. AV devices now are heavily software driven, and they're receiving firmware and software updates that enhance those products and provide new features and capabilities. So as the life cycle of that product goes on, it can be introducing new features and new capabilities that could be accessing other information that you need to continually assess. And the monitoring system and understanding about how it's accessing the network is a key part of that.
Enhance is an interesting word, especially when you mentioned CrowdStrike earlier. Obviously, the CrowdStrike update was not an enhancement. You could also go the other way here too. I mean, obviously, quality control, testing, that sort of thing, obviously that's fallen over somewhere there, but we do need to think about making sure that we're trusting the vendors that we're using, the updates that are coming down are valid, etc. And we know that we're not going to regress the performance of the device by keeping it up to date in certain types of, in terms of security patches and things like that. The other thing I would say too is I was just thinking when Jonathan was talking about all the software updates and all that sort of stuff, who actually turns their AV equipment off when it's not being used? I know we don't. I'd hate to think what our power bill is, but anyway.
Isn't that one of the common mitigations if you're going through a hack, is to turn off your machines?
Yeah, it is. Obviously pulling the network cable out, you see all sorts of funny memes with people getting hacked and they're kind of trying to jerk the network cable out of the back of the machine or something. But I mean, years past, I can think of several different server operating systems that were fully security compliant as long as it wasn't connected to the network. It makes no sense. But we need to think about those sorts of principles when it comes to AV. And does it need to be on all the time? Does it need to be active on the network all the time? Maybe it does, because we need to make sure we're getting urgent software updates out to that device no matter when those updates come out, because it's going to be vulnerable as soon as it gets turned back on again. I don't know. What's the right answer?
I don't know if there's a right answer to it. I mean, I do think that this gets into the on-off part of it is related to the accessibility. You want that sort of walk right in, instant on. You don't want to have to futz with the technology. And so there is, again, this bias towards ensuring that it's real easy and it's ready to go when you are. That does work against some of the considerations of security. I do believe that the monitoring is becoming more broad-based, because I know as a vendor, we often, I don't want to say every day, but much, much more often than we used to, we'll get inquiries from large customers who say, hey, your device, had this, this issue was brought up by a scan of our network and your device. Can you please kind of comment on what this is? It used to not happen before. So we're not completely invisible.
So let me ask a direct question then, because Cisco's a large global vendor and has a very large footprint. Do you maintain your own SOC of client-managed devices and manage security on behalf of other customers? Is that something that you would, whether you publicly do that or not, is that something that maybe, if you do, should be part of an AV consideration, that large vendors should probably start looking after their footprint?
I think it's a very good question. The direct answer is actually we don't manage security for customers, but then we also support probably one of the biggest customers we have globally, which is Cisco. So obviously we have extensive security operations centers, actually 3 of them around the world that run 24/7, 365, as you can imagine. Funnily enough, Cisco uses a lot of their own equipment, so we call ourselves customer zero. So typically, we do rely a lot on the fact that, we're probably going to experience an issue before our customers do, or at least the same time, and then, we're very tuned to responding, to those sorts of incidents. So internally, the internal security operations center at Cisco is incredibly powerful, and there is a lot of investment put into that. And again, it's around reputation, right? It's, years to build a good reputation when it comes to security. It takes you seconds to lose it. So we spend a lot of time making sure that we're doing the right thing.
And then as we move into, I guess, collaboration and security, can we secure collaboration devices in environments that rely heavily on AV technologies?
Well, this really comes back to a question of risk mitigation. It's about, okay, well, we're on the spectrum of completely risk averse to completely open. Does my organisation, or if you took a closer look, that particular department, what's their risk profile? What kind of content or information are they dealing with? And when you make that assessment, then you can understand, okay, well, how many barriers or friction points can I introduce, or how many do I need to remove? And that's going to be the key driver behind how you encourage the collaboration in the AV technology.
And then,
or just rely on cyber insurance.
That's increasingly,
which some organisations do. Like
increasingly part of the mix, isn't it? Yep. Yeah. What about encryption? Is encryption playing more of a role in these types of systems?
I could say from a manufacturer's point of view, yes, it certainly does. I mean, it's, again, going down that same mode of what are the tools that have been developed that promote security. And so whether it's authentication or it's transport protection like encryption, we're trying to make our job as a vendor is we don't necessarily put together the complete systems or deliver services. And so we try to ensure that the tools on our different pieces of equipment are adequate to allow system integrators to go and activate them in a responsible way and kind of find the balance that you're talking about. Not per se prescribe which is that right balancing point, but give them the tools to make the decision for themselves.
So there you're talking about data in motion and data at rest. So, the types of technologies you're using between those different types would be different. I mean, from a manufacturer viewpoint, data at rest would be probably your domain. So we're making sure that, the data stored on the device is secured. when it's connected to the network, it's data in motion when it's being transferred, or you're inside some sort of video call or something like that. That also is down to the manufacturer and the types of protocols they'll actually support. But then you have to make sure that the rest of your infrastructure can also support those same protocols. So I'd assume from a consulting viewpoint, you would see aspects where maybe one device is actually really security capable on the network, and maybe an older device they don't necessarily want to get rid of straight away might be pulling the side down, so to speak.
Yes, we do see that.
And if we move then to innovation, are there emerging security technologies that can enhance the protection of AV systems?
I think the big one, I'll jump in there first, if you don't mind. The big one will be about monitoring. So being able to extend the capabilities, the monitoring, the tools, tool sets, etc. we have inside our security operations centres and involve the AV infrastructure. We are making progress there. There's more we need to do. We can't just do it ourselves. We obviously need to do it with the AV industry as well. But, I am seeing some really positive signs there at the moment. But it's certainly not where I'd like to see it yet.
You can't just stick AI on it and then
I thought we did really well we're 40 minutes into this and no one's mentioned AI yet. It's like at Cisco, I get a bonus if I mention AI within the first 3 seconds of any presentation. So
no bonus for you.
I was resisting, but now that you have broken the wall there, I was going to ask, AI does seem to represent both a point of protection and a point of risk, right? I mean, you can imagine AI is not just being able to execute a threat vector, but to create one and do it in a novel ways and at a speed that would be tough to offset, other than by maybe another AI. Do you worry about a lot of like that? Again, we're more customers of a lot of the practices rather than innovators there. But
feels like a real divide starting to happen on this panel.
Well, homage or respect for the work that you've done.
Absolutely. So there's different aspects of AI, right? So, one of the technologies that I have spent a lot of time in is email security. Not the most exciting thing in the world, but certainly a pretty critical part. Generative AI is a massive issue. It's not as if the phishers out there are manually typing every single phishing email or business email compromise that they're sending your way. They are being, massively automatically generated using generative AI. One of the ways they have of getting through the typical spam filters is to make each one a little bit different, because then to us it doesn't look like a volumetric attack, which is how spam and that sort of stuff sort of comes along. So generative AI is fantastically useful, those sorts of things. On the other hand, we use predictive AI technologies to recognise those sorts of attacks, and that's where we need to try and stay ahead. But AI is also who is securing your AI infrastructure. That's the other part too. So AI is learning from source data. Where is that source data and where is it coming from, and can you trust that source data? There's a whole lot of aspects here when it comes to AI. Now that you've opened that Pandora's box, that I think the industry needs to be worried about. But thinking about AI in terms of a advantage for AV security, inside SOC tools, so a SOC tool would be called a SIEM, Security Incident Event Management, or an XDR console for maybe a slightly more evolved version of a SIEM, and I'll probably get the sack for referring to those that way. But AI assistance and those sorts of tool sets are already available. So a security analyst can basically say, I'm seeing this event on this AV endpoint. What does it mean to me? Why do I need to be concerned? And the AI engine go out and basically say, that event is coming up because that AV is using that version of the software. That is a known vulnerability here. It's a low priority, needs to be fixed at some stage, but it's not as if we need to stop everything we're doing and go and resolve this right now. Or it might be the other way. So AI assistants are able to save them a lot of time in being able to sort of understand how important an issue might be and how quickly we need to respond to it. So that sort of technology is really interesting at the moment, and I think it bodes well for getting across more and more security tool sets as we go forward.
The innovation that I see, and maybe I'll get shot for saying this as a technologist, but is not in the technology. Bradley, you're absolutely right. Our tools to monitor have been available for some time and they're improving, but the innovation is coming in the organisation operations. It's how do we actually view AV and what processes do we have in place to regularly monitor it, regularly do vulnerability testing and understand when there is a real threat and when there's not. So it's almost like an organisational innovation about understanding that it is a risk and how to deal with it rather than the technology innovation itself.
And you know how to make us move faster? You guys ask us for it. if everybody starts asking us for, hey, I need to connect my AV infrastructure into my, your Cisco XDR product, and I need to do this quickly, this is like the number one requirement, you betcha we'll start moving a lot quicker than we are right now.
So I've got two final questions for the panel, and for those of you who have the app and want to ask some questions, please use it. Otherwise, we can hand a mic around. But as we move into the future, what are those sort of future trends in AV security to prepare for these challenges? If people in the audience are thinking maybe the next 12 months ahead, what should I prepare for? What tools or technologies should I look for? And then the other aspect of that is think about, is there a case study or a success story that you have in mind that maybe we could point them to illuminate some of that? Now, I know most people don't want to talk about their security challenges, and success stories in security aren't necessarily a success. They're a clean-up, perhaps. But maybe final thoughts for the audience today.
Look, my view there is you need to allocate resources, that's human resources, people, to be able to take care of it as a real item of concern. Right now, we don't have people responsible for AV security. It kind of falls to the IT security people, and it's not really a focus for them. It's outside of their real remit. So we need to create a role or give someone the remit that this is your responsibility and you can run with it. And then if they're asking the questions to your point, then the right processes and policies and settings and configuration can take place.
I'd say my final thoughts on it are, the AV industry is a very human industry, right? I mean, relative to a lot of other things that might pass over the network that really might go without the touch or interaction of the human being. AV is not about that, right? It's all about communication that begins with the human and ends with another one. And that's the one part of the system that we can't upgrade. So we sort of deal with what we can do and the capabilities as we come. And so no matter what we do to ensure, data in motion or something like that, the opportunities or the threat vectors that begin and end with the human being are the ones that I think are the most interesting for us. We were talking about AI again, and AI, one of the big worries about AI is its ability to be incredibly persuasive, right? Whether it's a phishing email or some other thing that exploits the weakest part of the system or the fixed part of the system, the human element of it. There's also an opportunity for it to be able to kind of support us and anticipate our weaknesses or our vulnerabilities and maybe provide a little bit of support there as well. So I think that that's going to be a very fertile and critical area for the AV industry in particular that may not apply to some other IoT in general, right, at device to device. But AV has people in it.
So there's something else we've got in common. The most vulnerable part of our infrastructure is also the human. We call it PEBCAC, or problem exists between keyboard and chair. But and obviously user education, etc. I think coming to the points that Jonathan made are critically important. The word I would use to sum it up is opportunities. So over the next 12 months, look for opportunities to work with your IT security people. Look for opportunities you have if you're refreshing equipment or something like that. Ask the question around security. Can this thing integrate in with a SIEM? Can it integrate in with maybe the security operations center or the monitoring tools that maybe they're planning on getting in the next 12 months? Start working together. Get to know your IT security people. Talk to them about where you're wanting to take your infrastructure and why, and where are they going, and how can you start bringing this stuff together? Because unless we start looking for these opportunities, we'll be back here in 12 months' time talking about silos and how we need to be working better again without making any progress.
Wonderful. Now we'll turn to questions from the audience. Are there any questions? I don't have any on the display, so.
BYOD is spreading to many places. Bring your own device. HDMI can now do internet, Ethernet. USB-C has got many capabilities. Should we discourage BYOD?
So bring your own device. Obviously, we've lost control of the actual devices themselves, but I think that's where concepts like zero trust become very important. So at the end of the day, IT security, we need to stop being the fun police. So we need to be able to enable and say yes to the devices, the locations, etc., that our users want to sort of work from. Obviously, governed by management, I guess. But so, we need to enable that. So Zero Trust enables us to have less concern about the actual device you're actually using, but we've validated that you're actually sitting behind that device, and we're only allowing you to access the exact resources you need to access, instead of allowing you onto the network and then, well, wherever you go from there is kind of up to you. That's the old way, right? Zero Trust, starting from nothing, building on your access from there is where we need to go, and that is a great way of enabling BYOD. But a lot of organisations look at BYOD as quite negatively because you're not able to validate the actual device itself. But at the end of the day, even if I don't have a client on your device, I can still understand what operating system you're using. I can probably have a good guesstimate about the actual patch level you're running, as in, how much of a threat is your device on my network? And let's look at that realistically, about what this user might be accessing. If he's the CFO, I might be a bit more concerned about him using a BYOD device versus the guy that's out packing boxes in the warehouse, as an example.
So, a very short answer to your question. Should we discourage BYOD? No. And I'll take your example of USB-C cable. So attached to the end of that USB-C cable is some sort of AV device. And this really goes back to what I was commenting on about being able to understand what they need to access and turning off the things that they don't need to access. So let's take that USB-C example. Do they need to display some content on the screen? Yes, enable that feature. Do they need to send audio to the system? Yes, enable that feature. Do they need network access? No. Let's cross that feature off and configure the device appropriately for that particular use case. And so you need to do that for each device, or have a set standard so that you can create a secure environment based on the requirements.
Cheers. Thank you.
So on that topic of USB-C, just to sort of continue that train, there's obviously some contention there where you have, say, larger orgs, people will go through, some quite sensible training, like don't plug in thumb drives to your work laptop. At the same time, they're walking into a meeting room and they go, oh, this wireless presenter puck that's USB-C, just plug that in, that's 80%. Or this USB-C cable that's in the table, just plug that in, it's fine. Some very mixed views there. Have you seen any good approaches? Like USB-C's not going anywhere, we're going to have more. Have you seen any good approaches for securing that where it is part of the built environment, beyond just turning off services on the device?
Well, it depends on to what extent you want to go to. Do you say, well, we're so security conscious and risk adverse that we're not going to have any physical plugins at all? Then you might go down a track of we only provide wireless presenting and we control the application that we deploy on the computers, and that's all you can use. So it depends on the level of risk for the organisation, and also how much friction you want to introduce for each of the users. Plugging in the cable is very easy. Launching an app on your computer and logging in is quite a lot of barriers.
So we can't eliminate the risk, but we can reduce the risk. So segmentation, and then again, intelligent segmentation, because segmentation's got a really bad reputation because it's probably annoyed a lot of you in this room when you've been trying to deploy equipment on a network, and Captain No in IT security has said no yet again. But segmenting so that that device is only able to access the projector, has no network. I think Jonathan makes a great point about the actual services on the device. So obviously turning off services on the device is one thing, but if it's BYOD, then I don't have the ability to turn off services on your device, but I can ring fence the device on the network using intelligent segmentation, so you can only do certain things. But I have control over the network. I don't have control over the video feeds and audio feeds and other ways that that device may collect or record information that's happening in the meeting.
Yeah, and I think from an AV equipment provider's point of view, again, I'd said we've taken the philosophy of ensuring that we put tools available on these devices to let them execute the policies that are appropriate for those organizations. Where we have run into the biggest issue is not everybody is Cisco. Not everybody has sophisticated consultants. They get a device, they put it in, they really don't understand how these tools work, or how to use it. And they'll often either not be able to get the device to work because we shut off everything and you have to turn it on, and they don't know how to do that. It just doesn't work. Or you go the other direction and you make it available, and then something bad happens to them. And again, they didn't know how to protect themselves. And so it's one thing to say the tools are available, but if they're too complicated for a vast majority of our users to put effectively, we still have a problem. So there's an education problem, certainly from our point of view, that we don't have the perfect answer for right now.
Wonderful. Well, that's time, and I think it's been really illuminating for me. So thank you, panel. Please thank our panel, Jonathan, Joe, and Bradley.